What does a boss who's built an image as a tough guy from Queens do when naysayers claim he's reached his limits? To dispel doubts, he can, for instance, hold the floor for an hour and 47 minutes. In the longest ever State of the Union address, Donald Trump proving he can stick to script instead of rambling. Trump, combative as ever, bashing immigrants, Iran, the opposition Democrats, and the Supreme Court for last week's ruling striking down many of his tariffs. The biggest pushback yet for a president who's wielded historically grand executive power since returning to office 13 months ago. We'll ask about his plans to not only double down on tariffs, he says they can replace income tax, and to do without congressional approval. We'll weigh Trump's methods, his arguments, and asked about blurred lines between public policy and personal interest as a term-limited president approaches midterm elections that could further corner a leader whose mantra has always been attack, attack, attack. What will Trump do, and how is the rest of the world reading the moment? Today in the France 24 debate, we're talking about the headwinds facing Donald Trump. With us, Vivian Walt, Paris correspondent for Time magazine. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Pleased to welcome Sean Safford, Associate Professor of Economic Sociology at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Francois.
And good to see from Washington, former U.S. federal prosecutor Eric Leeson. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Not so bad. If you're on the go, you can listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. Plenty of hyperbole and heckling on Capitol Hill Tuesday night. Donald Trump bragging about a new golden age while blasting Democrats for not standing when he called them to do so to protect American citizens, not illegal aliens. Fresh off their gold medal win over Canada at the Winter Olympics, Team USA's men's ice hockey team feted with medals and plaudits. That, too, turned into a politically charged moment where Trump blasted lawmakers from the left side of the aisle.
That's the first time I've ever seen them get up. And actually, not all of them did get up. But they beat a fantastic Canadian team in overtime, as everybody saw, as did the American women who will soon be coming to the White House.
Yeah, Vivian Walt, the men's ice hockey team winning, that too became political.
Yes, it did. It reminded me a little bit of President Macron in the locker room of the French World Cup team after their loss. But here you had the director of the FBI celebrating in the locker room of the U.S. hockey team. It seemed to many eyes completely political and rather unseemly, particularly given the fact that hockey as a sport is regarded as being an extremely white, somewhat tilting to conservative sport in the realm of professional sports. Here you have like the team really being used by the president on his big night in Congress. Bravo that they won the medals. Very bad that the women were not there and were not celebrated equally. And it was really kind of I would think a moment that's going to linger a little bit uncomfortably with a lot of the players.
The gold medal winning women's ice hockey team, gold medal winning as well, they made their excuses. This after Donald Trump had told the men in the winning locker room through the speakerphone of, as Vivian was mentioning, his FBI director Kash Patel's device, that he'd have to invite the women too to the White House. This is what they said. They said, "We're sincerely grateful for the invitation extended to our gold medal winning team and appreciate the recognition. Due to timing and previously scheduled academic and professional commitments following the games, the athletes are unable to participate." It's kind of is this a boys versus girls kind of thing, Sean Safford?
I mean, the athletes who showed up at the Olympics a few weeks ago made it clear that they were not timid to speak their minds on politics. Some of them spoke out against Trump, and in this case, the men's team made the decision to join. But I think that it's been clear actually that a lot of the women made a very concerted choice not to attend, right? And so the politics are going both ways.
Is this a bellwether of anything, or does this blow over? Vivian saying that this is something that could linger.
I mean, you emphasize that I'm a sociologist. I mean, the fact is that, of course, that Donald Trump has reveled in breaking norms and, kind of dismissing norms that he doesn't particularly enjoy, and then sort of trying to play up the norms that he thinks play up his status and standing. People sort of have played along with the norms. The norm in the past would have been athletes don't really talk about these things. We try to speak in broad terms about, American patriotism and things like this. Trump has broken these norms. And so I think for now, we'll see if in a post-Trump era, if norms come back. But for now, if Trump isn't going to follow these norms, why should anybody else?
Let's talk about norms, Eric Lisan, because on the Trump meter, this speech followed some norms in that he read from the prompter most of the time. There was what he mentioned, what he did not mention. He did not mention, for instance, China, Ukraine, Greenland, and of course, he did not mention the Epstein files.
That's right. He has no intention of being a true unifier. He has no intention of honestly engaging with the global pressing issues that could impact on Americans just as well as everybody else around the world. He views this as a lens strictly to further his own partisan ambitions, which in his mind are closely tied into his personal ego and his desire to stand out and seek gratification at the expense of others. In this case, it was forcing Republicans to go along with him and jeering and deriding Democrats and anybody who dared oppose him in any way. So in that sense, it was very typical of everything he's done in the last 8 years, everything he's politicized, things that before him were never politicized. And he's used the opportunity to continually plunge into that until such time as he may be stopped.
Vivian Walt, there were some Democrats who decided not to attend, others that did when there was that stand up if you're with me moment. Was it right or wrong for the Democrats to show up? Should they have boycotted the State of the Union address?
A remarkable number of Democrats, and by the way, also Supreme Court justices, did not attend last night's State of the Union. I think about 50 Democrats were missing, which is rather a large number. The moment, obviously, that they had rehearsed and prepared for was an ambush of the Democrats who did show up, in which Trump demanded that whoever puts national security as the top priority of the president should stand up rather than protecting illegal aliens, as he put it, or illegal immigrants, I think he said.
Illegal aliens, he said.
Illegal aliens, pardon me, yeah, as if they come from the moon. But this was obviously a trap. It's very difficult to see how the Democrats could have, foreseen that something like that might have happened. I'm sure they have a lot of second thoughts about what they might have done in that moment. But at that moment, it became a moment that the Republicans can, create a little Instagram clip out of and put on a infinite.
So you're saying the Republicans better prepared than the Democrats for this?
I would think so, but it was their night. So of course they were. I would say even the fact that he spoke for nearly 2 hours. By the time the Democratic governor of Virginia, gave her response to the State of the Union, it was so late in the night that, 90% of Americans were asleep by then. And I would imagine that was part of the thinking as well.
All right, so as you were stating, 4 out of the 9 Supreme Court justices in attendance. This after last Friday's ruling striking down tariffs on a international state. They were greeted with a cordial handshake. They were bashed from the rostrum, though, for that 6-3 ruling that tariffs exceed the powers given to the president by Congress under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The U.S. president telling lawmakers he'd found a workaround and he won't be needing their approval for these new mechanisms.
They're a little more complex, but they're actually probably better, leading to a solution that will be even stronger than before, congressional action will not be necessary. It's already time-tested and approved. And as time goes by, I believe the tariffs paid for by foreign countries will, like in the past, substantially replace the modern-day system of income tax, taking a great financial burden off the people that I love.
A lot to unpack there, Eric Lisan. Let's begin with the income tax being replaced by tariffs.
Well, it's madness. It doesn't make any sense. Any economist will tell you that. And much of what he said there, in fact, all of it is directly contrary to what the majority of the Supreme Court actually said. What he's really communicating is that nothing matters to him other than what he wants to do. It's his world, and he's going to force everybody to live in it. And unless they can stop him and resist what he's doing and return to a lawful order, he's going to impose his will.
So,
right now,
so just for instance, when it says congressional action will not be necessary, can you fact check that for us when it comes to how it works under the U.S. Constitution?
Absolutely. The Constitution specifically delegates the power to tax, including the power to impose tariffs, to Congress. So from the outset, there's no legal ability in the president to impose tariffs without an express delegation from Congress. And even when there is that, Congress has to be very careful in specifically authorizing what they give him in terms of that power. Otherwise, he doesn't get it. Congress was, the Supreme Court, was very clear in that in its decision just a few days ago, reiterating that very fundamental fact, and he's ignoring it. He's saying, I'm going to do what I want without Congress anyway. I have my own interpretation. And he's got people there, Republicans, and the vice president who's going to nod and go along, the Speaker of the House who's going to nod and go along, even though this is fundamentally a right is wrong situation. He's saying black is white. That is absolutely not what the Supreme Court ruled. It's not what is written in the Constitution. It's not ever what the law has been. He is just going to continue on his tack, which is not grounded in any objective reality, which is shared by the world around him.
Let me play devil's advocate here, Sean Safford, because up to now, the courts have gone along a lot with Donald Trump when it comes to pushing the boundaries of what the president can do without approval from Congress.
They have. I mean, Trump, I think the thing that's most important to understand about Trump is that he does not think of power in the traditional sense. He does not think of power based on what's in the Constitution. He doesn't really even think about power in terms of, whether he has the public behind him or not. He thinks about power in terms of leverage. He thinks about power in terms of, who gets to define what is true and what isn't, right? And in that sense, he has always followed this rule: just ignore whatever people tell him is the reality and find the ways to use whatever leverage he has to get more leverage.
Over the last 13 months, it's worked.
It has absolutely worked. He has put everybody on the back foot. He's put Congress on the back foot. The courts have been essentially, open to his interpretation of the idea of emergency power. They did not overturn that in this decision. All they overturned was the idea that he cannot impose a tax, but he still retains discretionary authority to declare emergencies all over the place, military, economic, and otherwise, and he's using that along with lots of other forms of leverage to just gather as much power to himself as he possibly can.
So the 6-3 ruling is a one-off?
I mean, if you put it in the context of the other rulings that have come down, basically testing whether or not he has the ability to use emergency power to declare an emergency on anything he wants, it is in some sense a one-off. It is a narrow ruling regarding his ability to impose taxes on the American public, but all of these other, authorities that he's gathered to himself have not been overturned.
Vivian Wong?
I mean, I think here's the thing. And I totally agree with Sean that here's a president. I think this is what's got people so off kilter, is that there's no precedent for this. You have a leader who doesn't really care about Congress or the Supreme Court. He just wants what he wants, and he wants it now, and he wants it, he doesn't care how. But here's the problem. Most Americans are not buying what he's selling. At this point, the polls show that a great number of Americans believe he's making the economy worse and that it's certainly not getting better. So when he stands up there and he says this is a turnaround for the ages, it kind of falls on Americans' ears as being kind of a false note in many ways. And that came early in his speech. So people were still tuning in. By the time he gets into talking about Somali pirates, et cetera, you know, many people have sort of changed the channel by that point. But I think the real problem is that if he does lose the midterm elections, if the Republicans lose, he is going to have a problem simply ramming through his policies, no matter what anybody else thinks. And I think that's the great risk for leading like this.
So, okay, Eric Leeson, this has been the argument since day one from Donald Trump's opposition that, well, the system will hold. If you don't like what you see, just wait for the midterms. We've heard that from both Republicans and some Democrats. Do you feel that way today after 13 months, or has the rule of law in the United States been degraded?
Well, it would be foolish to think, oh, we're okay, just wait to the midterms and we're going to straighten it all out. I don't know if anybody's putting it in those terms exactly. That would be incredibly naive. First of all, even the conduct of the midterms themselves is very much in question. So we don't know even how the votes are going to be counted, whether he's going to deploy federal agents or National Guard troops to various places to depress turnout. There's legislation pending now called the SAVE Act, which imposes a lot of restrictions on voters. He's tried to unilaterally gerrymander things by pressuring states to, like Texas famously, although that might have backfired, we don't know yet, and on a national sense, but he's doing a lot of things to skew the outcome of the midterms. But even if the midterms go in the way that they seem to be going right now, which is that there will be a quote unquote blue wave and a change of control, which almost the conventional wisdom is that will certainly happen in the House of Representatives, that's not going to be much of a break. And even in terms of restraining what he's doing, and even if it does, he's not going to be necessarily bound by that. That also, by the way, puts the Senate in a very difficult or very important situation. It had been thought a year ago that there's no way the Senate would change control, but now that does seem to be very much in play. If there's a regular election, given the current trends, it may very well be that Senate Democrats can flip 4 Republican seats, which was considered unheard of a year ago, and retake control of the Senate. That might be a big deal. That would be a big deal, because then the Democrats would have control of both chambers and would be able to do more than they could by only holding one chamber. But even with all that, fixing everything is going to be a huge problem. And Democrats have not shown that they're really in that mode. They've been on their back foot, even by showing up the way they did and sitting there somewhat feebly while they were insulted by their Republican colleagues, not having a prepared response. They were played yet again. And unless there's a real Project 2025 type analog on the Democratic side to fix all of the things that have been broken in the service of Trump's personal and partisan political ambitions, we're not going to be that much better off. It'll be better than the alternative in continuing the way things are now. But most people don't, in terms of the general American electorate, I'm not sure they really understand the stakes of what's going on. Yes, there's economic pressures. The tariffs have contributed to this quote unquote affordability crisis. But the disinformation is so strong and so palpable that it really does trump the reality of, and I use Trump with a small t here, it negates the reality because the disinformation is so strong. People don't really understand anymore the world that they're living in. And this has been the Trump with a capital T effect.
Yeah, so let's give a concrete example of where there may be parallel universes and talk about tariffs, because that's an issue that's worrying people on both sides of the Atlantic of what happens next. A lot of uncertainty. You heard earlier that clip of the U.S. president saying that eventually tariffs could replace income tax. News site Axios went over the Treasury Department's revenues and concludes the numbers do not add up. It says that income taxes brought in roughly $2.6 trillion with a T in the most recent fiscal year. Customs duties only about $195 billion in that same period. We had earlier this month Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary defending tariffs before a Senate panel. Scott Bessent insisting they'll bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States. He says, in theory, they'd be like the shrinking ice cube, that you would tariff a country, and then as the production comes back to the U.S., the income tax, the corporate revenues, and the paid income tax goes up, and the tariff income goes down. Is that the same message as what we heard in that clip of Donald Trump earlier, Sean Safford, that there's going to be income tax coming back or not? Is there going to be, is the idea to bring manufacturing jobs back? What is the point of these tariffs at this point?
We've had 4 different justifications for the tariffs over the last 13 months. The first 2 were actually contradictory. One was to bring back manufacturing to the United States. The other was to try to correct imbalances in what he felt were, burdens placed on American manufacturers, American, sellers of goods abroad. The truth is you can't actually do those 2 things at once. And the bigger truth is that neither of those things can be done within a year. If you're really serious about doing that kind of, fundamental change, structural change to the economy, it takes a long time. So in the meantime, the logic shifted to raising revenue. Basically, we have a big budget deficit in the United States. It's been politically very unpopular to raise taxes. There's nobody on either side of the aisle is willing to do that. And so Trump found what he thought was a relatively simple way to do this. And it has been successful. He's raised,
it's a record amount, but as we saw, it pales in comparison to what income tax brings in.
But again, I think the fourth justification and what he's really upset about, the way that he reacted the next day was clear that this isn't really about sort of policy. It is about his ability to put leverage on countries that he is angry at or countries that he wants to influence or states within the United States that he may want to manipulate. It, for him, was basically a lever of personal power. And that has been, eroded. But when we get to the question of what is the long-term implication of this, whether it's bringing manufacturing back, I think, unfortunately, it's the short-term view is not going to get us very far right now.
So, Vivian Wald, is it leverage, as you just heard Sean say, over in other negotiations? That's how you use tariffs. And we heard Donald Trump say that at times during the speech. Or is it about, well, you won't need income tax anymore. You won't have to pay income tax.
I don't think anyone takes the second argument particularly seriously. If you talk to economists or analysts or investors, it just seems completely not feasible. As regards the first one, he said something interesting last night. He said countries and companies are, happy to pay this rate, this tariff rate as it is, despite what the Supreme Court says, because if they don't, they're going to have an even worse deal. In other words, a kind of almost bullying tactics. You better take what you can get. Otherwise, I'm going to make life even harder. But actually, the reality of the last year is that those countries that had really fought back, like Brazil, India, China, actually have seen their tariff rates drop a lot compared to, for example, Europe, that simply went along and signed a deal. If you remember, the Commission President, Ursula
Went to
von
a
der
Trump
Leyen,
golf course in Scotland.
flew to Scotland, and, you know, they sat together smiling, and everybody, you know, was furious in Europe, saying, you know, she just rolled over. They are actually going to see their tariff rate potentially increase.
Were you surprised that he did not mention China in his speech?
Not a word. Look, he's going to China soon. He clearly has a lot of, you know, irons in the fire, if you like, with Beijing. There's a lot he's dealing with, and it's not clear who has the upper hand right now. China seems to be in a pretty strong position in trade negotiations with Trump. So I guess in that way, I wasn't surprised that he didn't mention China. Maybe I was surprised he had the discipline not to mention China.
Okay. Last April, when Donald Trump announced his Liberation Day tariffs, as he called them, by his side stood his old Wall Street pal, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. Lutnick handed the reins of bond trading firm Cantor Fitzgerald away when he joined Trump's cabinet. Last July, news site Wired reported how a subsidiary of the firm, run by his sons, told potential investors they could buy their claims for refunds should the tariffs be voided by the courts. The Daily Beast picking up on the denial, which has been reported by news site Semaphore. That denial reads that a Cantor spokesman said the salesman erroneously believed the firm was likely to greenlight the business. They then went on looking for the other side of the trade. Cantor Fitzgerald has never executed any transactions or taken risk on the legality of tariffs, he said. Any report suggesting otherwise is completely false. Eric Gleason, your reaction to that denial?
Well, who knows what's really true or not? Much of what's come out from Howard Lutnick or any entities that he controls or is strongly affiliated with, like Cantor Fitzgerald, has proven to be completely false. Just like I mean, you have to treat that the same way you would his statements about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, which turned out to be completely false. It does seem to indicate at a minimum that Lutnick at least understood, despite his sort of bumbling public persona in which he says ridiculous things in support of Donald Trump's economic policies of the day, which constantly change, that Lutnick understood that there were powerful economic interests that could force the Supreme Court to strike down these tariffs and enforce the actual law and interpret the IEEPA law, the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, properly. In that case, all of these tariffs would be struck down. Even Europe, which you mentioned a few minutes ago, they're potentially going to benefit because the United States is not going to be able to enforce the great majority of these tariffs against any of its trading partners anymore, regardless of what the trading partners agree to. So Lutnick there is saying he had the knowledge and the foresight to at least scout out this, sort of brilliant grift, while on the one hand pushing one end of the tariffs by saying they're a great thing and of course they're legal, on the back end and privately saying let's bet against it and let's pick up all the hedge business against it, so we'll make out when the tariffs are struck down. Now they're denying that that was ever done, but clearly he had that idea, and that's what's important here, is that there's an enormous opportunity for grift in all of this, and the people on the inside of the Trump administration are thinking about this all the time, and they're making out like bandits.
So from your days when you were a federal prosecutor, at what point would you be launching an investigation for, as you put it, grifting?
This should have been launched 13 months ago. This started on day one of the Trump administration, but he's completely neutered, and we've talked about this before.
Because it's one thing, Eric, if I may, it's one thing to come from Wall Street to a cabinet position, because that's been done forever, it seems, and of course there are revolving doors, and of course when you're become the Treasury Secretary or the Commerce Secretary, you still speak to your old friends.
Yes, absolutely, but there were bright lines that were drawn in terms of the activities that could be done there's not only ethical norms and statutes that have been violated, there's criminal ones. And arguably, there's criminal ones that have been violated here, too. Criminal conflict of interest and disclosure laws that at the least should be investigated as to whether they were broken. And there's no indication that there's going to be any investigation here. Trump, the people, Trump's henchmen at the Department of Justice, Pam Bondi, Todd Blanche, et cetera, they well understand, regardless of whatever Trump directs them to do, that he doesn't want an investigation into Howard Lutnick, and they're going to, or anybody else that's involved in the administration. There's enormous grifts by all the members of Trump's family, even Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, who seem to be linchpins for what's going on in Russia and in Iran and every place else, seem to be heavily implicated with their personal financial interests. There are criminal violations that potentially could and normally would be investigated here, but the government has lost the ability to do that. It's been systematically broken.
There were 4 years between Trump 1 and Trump 2. What investigations were there? I mean, is it you know, until you have, you know, a conviction, you can't say that that there's a crime that's been committed. Sean Safford, is the grift on?
I mean, you know, in the case of Howard Lutnick, it's really not clear if this is grift, right? What it indicates to me is specifically that, you know, the way that tariffs have been handled. You know, Howard Lutnick has been the most vociferous, you know, member of the cabinet in favor of these tariffs, and yet it indicates that he was never really confident in it. He never really understood it. His rollout of it has been absolutely shambolic. In any other administration, he would have been out on his ear for incompetence well before he was out on his ear for grift. But the grift, I mean, it's small potatoes in terms of grift, in terms of what else has been going on in terms of the Trump administration. And it all just gets back, sorry to be the sociologist again, but to Norbs, the idea that, you know, it is just now normal that the son-in-law of the president is running around the world and you know, making all this money, that the sons of the president are invested in crypto. I mean, Howard Lutnick's son's making a couple $1 billion on a potentially a short trade that's not even clear that
they're norms because there's no laws against them, right?
There's no laws against them, but it used to be that, you know, the you know, fair-minded Republicans would have stood up again, you know, in their own party to say something, right, and say, no, this goes too far. You know, the Democrats have done that in the past. The Republicans have done that in the past. What Trump has done is turned that into, you know, like, look, this. He understands that this is a way that power is wielded, and he's refused to sort of give in to the idea that norms, grift, breaking even, you know, minor laws is something that should be held against a president as long as, you know, he's getting done what he thinks the people want him to get done.
What are the motivations of this administration to carry out the MAGA agenda or personal enrichment? Vivian Walt.
Well, certainly what Eric says, this is truly like a kind of grifting operation within the administration, which is sort of hard to compute. I don't think we can begin to wrap our arms around how big this is. There are simply billions being made on every level. And, you know, very smartly, the president last night went on this big moral outrage about stock trading within the Congress, which certainly is something that should be cracked down upon. It is in most democratic countries, I believe. And, you know, it was so clearly a way of deflecting away from this rising talk of the fact that you have an administration of billionaires enriching their own families and themselves at a time when most Americans are really struggling.
Eric Lisan, we talk about norms. What about standards? Have standards slipped in the United States? This isn't just about an administration.
Yes, there's this concept called the Overton window, which I'm sure you've heard about and discussed, where people can accept different things over a period of time that maybe not too long previously they would have accepted, that they would have refused to accept, rather. And that's where we are now here, whether we're talking about norms, which is a little bit softer, standards, which is a little bit harder, or even the basic enforcement of the law, even the criminal law. People now are accepting things, whether voluntarily or not, that even a few years ago they would not have. You had mentioned this 4-year interlude between Trump 1 and Trump 2. That was a lost opportunity. Biden did many good things, but he had a bumbling attorney general, Merrick Garland, and Biden himself did not seem to grasp the importance of trying to revert back to where we were with norms and standards and the enforcement of laws. He didn't want to look back. He wanted to look forward. But when you don't look back, when you don't hold people accountable, everything slips. And what the public can tolerate slips as well. And we now have a public which seemingly, certainly the Republican Party, in terms of its elected officials, gladly accepts and tolerates enormous amounts of corruption, even when it's directly contrary to the interests of the United States in obvious and brazen ways. And this acceptance is not something that would have existed before Donald Trump came on the scene. He's really pushed it. And now we're in a completely different place in terms of what the public accepts and understands. And getting back to where we were before is going to require an enormous amount of effort in terms of public awareness and actually leading by demonstrating and leading by doing, something that did not occur in that interregnum between Trump 1 and Trump 2.
And there was a lot of, there's always been a lot of money from here in Europe that's been poured into the United States. Now, because the situation's hard to read, because there are these questions of the cost of doing business in the United States, you have, for instance, images from earlier in the day, Germany's chancellor in China, 3-day visit after the recent visit of Canada's prime minister to Beijing. The EU, meanwhile, has broken its long deadlock on trade deals with India, the South American Mercosur bloc. And while the world economy continues to grow so far in 2026, the investments are coming more to Europe. Money crossing the Atlantic in the other direction. The MSCI Global Stock Index up 2% so far this year. That's a global index. But if you take away U.S. listings, that number soars to 9%. Vivian Walt, during the first year of Trump's second term, we've been sold this idea that because Silicon Valley is so far ahead of everybody else, that's drawing all the capital, all the money and everything. Turns out now markets are quietly withdrawing?
I think it's not just Europe. I just interviewed Canada's Minister of Energy and Natural Resources, Canada being a giant energy and natural resources power. And he and a number of his other ministers are traveling around the world like crazy. He was in Paris, he was on his way to India, Carney's in India, the others were in Mexico, Singapore, signing trade deals everywhere. And this is not just Canada. It's every major economy is doing this. And at the same time, they've paused the trade negotiations with the U.S. because it's, as Sean put it, shambolic. So, Japan has, the EU scrapped its ratification of the Trump tariff deal.
It's paused.
It's paused. It scrapped the scheduled ratification for that was supposed to be next month. India's, cancelled its trade delegation to Washington. It's supposed to be in Washington right now as we speak. So clearly, I think that the world needs some consistency. People are exhausted. They don't know what tariff rate is going to be from month to month. So I think it's beginning to have a wearying effect.
So, Sean Safford, free trade's not dead, just not with the United States so much?
There's a big question. It's not clear if free trade is dead or not. Are we moving back to a time when you have kind of different poles where, the U.S. and China, maybe Europe, maybe India, sit at the top of some kind of, trading pyramid, and they are going against one another, right? Or do we go back, what we've had since the 1990s is basically the idea of a global system where each country, each region has its competitive advantage, and everybody's sort of tried to compete within some kind of market context. The question, though, so do we go back? Do we go back to free trade? Do we go back to even to a time when there were norms and the rule of law held? I think that's the wrong way to frame it. The old world is dead, a new world is emerging, and the question really is, particularly for France and for Europe, are they prepared to play the game? Are we all just tired and weary of what's going on? Or is this kind of little stumble that Trump is having a moment to kind of gather the forces and assert yourself within
but already
the redefinition
with the
of what's
money
coming?
coming back to Europe, do they have more leverage in those negotiations?
They absolutely do. And if Europe can get its act together as Europe, right, to assert its not only its power, its economic power, right, but if the United States is going to step back from the position that it's held for generations as the advocate for global trade, for advocate for free markets, for the advocate for sort of global standards of of certain things, Europe is in the bird's nest. It's developed the capacity to engage in this kind of thing, certainly within Europe, and to engage, to build these kinds of global coalitions around standards, around free trade and labor standards and all these things. So if Europe was able to kind of get its act together, this would be an opportunity for them to assert themselves.
We're out of time. Vivian Walt, can Europe get its act together?
I think that's a big if, and I think we've spoken about it around this table a few times before. That's a big if Europe can unite and get its act together and not revert back to kind of competitive nationalist instincts. Yes, of course. Europe as a united economy beats out the US, beats out China. And it has to know how to harness that power.
All right, so a lot of uncertainty, a lot of ifs. We'll have to leave it there. Vivian Walt, I want to thank you. I want to thank Sean Safford. Eric Lisan for being with us from Washington. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.